Hey, folks, it's Rick Wilson back again, live with Senator Alex Padilla of California, the great state of California, who has been in the news a little bit lately for doing what I think most members of Congress should be doing, which is trying to hold this government to account. He had a particularly dramatic moment. I guess it was about a week ago now. Time seems to stretch out, Senator, in which Kristi Noem's security detail threw him to the ground, pretending they didn't know who he was. So, Senator, I want to welcome you to the show once again. And first off, I want to say, I know a lot of us have been very curious about how you're doing. And I wanted to also talk about the speech you made on the Senate floor after this, because I think it was a moving and important one. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you, Rick. Thank you for having me. And it shouldn't have taken this to finally come on your show, but I guess of the most important reasons to be on the show. As I think I've tried to articulate since the incident happened, quick to let the general public know this isn't just about me, right? This is how this administration responds to a United States senator with a question. Then we can only imagine what's happening in so many corners of the country, to so many people when the cameras are not there. Right. What other types of overreaches, what other types of abuses of power?
Sure.
Because what we've seen in Los Angeles is nothing short of a militarization of the second largest city in America.
Right.
That sounds like an exaggeration. It sounds extreme, but it's exactly what's happened. The unnecessary and counterproductive federalization of National Guard troops and the deployment of the Marines domestically, that's huge and only a reflection of the authoritarian mentality of Donald Trump. So yes, doing my job as a member of Congress of oversight and accountability, we have to ask questions, we have to demand answers and information. And I hope that this moves the needle, not just in terms of the general public understanding and recognition of the overreach of this administration, but with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, especially on the other side of the aisle, of their obligation to the Constitution, not to Trump.
I heard from a couple people on the other side of the aisle, staff and one member, who were pretty shocked by this, who did not, and I'm sure some of them have come to you privately. They're obviously afraid to say anything publicly because of the guy on Pennsylvania Avenue. But this really was a level of abuse. I mean, Kristi Noem has been before your committee. She knows who you are. And she then went out after this and told a direct lie about it, that you didn't identify yourself, that she had no idea you were charging the podium, all that stuff. Has she spoken to you since then? Have they tried to reach out? Are they trying to diplomatically cover any of this at all?
Yeah. Maybe you heard, maybe you didn't hear. We actually had about a 10, maybe 15-minute meeting a little bit after that press conference concluded. As they were taking the handcuffs off of me, they offered me a meeting with the secretary, and we're doubtful. But I immediately said yes. Despite the treatment that I was subject to, they were shocked. They thought, it was going to be, and of course not. I don't know how they expected me to react, but again, I was there to do a job, get more information. Not only have you not been answering my questions recently, but going back to the beginning of the administration. Not the secretary, not the department, not in congressional hearings, right? They evade questions. They don't answer substantively. So we follow it up with letters and formal inquiries that have been largely non-responded to. And so, we had an initial conversation. At least that, I guess, was civil, but no information, but a commitment to follow up. So we're working on the follow-up. What I can share with you is this, not from DHS directly, but from the Cato Institute, we begin to get data that tells us more than 90% of migrants detained since October, the federal fiscal year, have no serious criminal convictions on their record. So finally, data to support what we've known. If this was just a matter of the federal government targeting truly violent, dangerous criminals, there would be no disagreement.
Nobody wants anybody like that on the street. No one. There's zero constituency for that.
What they're doing is far different.
So that idea that ICE is, I've always found like an amazing contradiction. On the one hand, Tom Homan and Kristi Noem and Donald Trump are saying, these people are in gangs. It's MS-13. And my question's always been like, are the guys that working at home or waiting at Home Depot to go work on a construction site, are they just taking time off from MS-13? Is this some sort of, I mean, the contradiction to me that LA is one of the central places in this country where people have come to build a new life.
Right. I mean, think about that, right? They talk so much about going after the bad guys and the
Mhm.
worst of the worst. And so where did they change policy to allow these enforcement actions to occur? Schools, workplaces, and houses of worship. Really?
Right.
That's where the worst of the worst hang out. They go to work, they go to school, and they go pray. Freaking believable.
Yeah.
Another contradiction. You look at this, the workforce that they're targeting, right? When you see the images of ICE agents chasing farm workers in the fields of Ventura County, let alone restaurants and hotels and et cetera. Remember the end of the first Trump administration at the outset of the COVID pandemic?
Mhm.
These were all workers that were declared essential
Right.
essential for our security in our economy, but now they're being the target of the rate. Here's another contradiction. When Secretary Noem was still governor of South Dakota under the Biden administration,
Right.
she suggested how wrong it would be for President Biden to federalize the National Guard against the wishes of the governor. And they're doing exactly that. The hypocrisy doesn't end.
Unlimited. So, we've seen I think, a sort of evolution in the protests against ICE in Los Angeles. It's less fully in the streets, and now it's a little more targeted. They're trying to protect people who are being rounded up. Protesters are trying to sort of identify these ICE raids. Are you concerned that they've privatized some of these raids? Because I'm hearing that they're now using bounty hunters and skip tracers and private and anybody can sort of jump into the pool of trying to round these people up. Have they had any clarity with you on exactly who they're employing now to do some of this stuff? Because it strikes me that no mask, no badge, no warrant is adding up to a potential really even more abusive situation than a lot of these immigrants are already facing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way they see it is no mask, no badge, no warrant, no accountability. That's what they want, right? And so all of that has to be revisited and reviewed. But I don't put anything past this administration. Look, by extension to your question, you also have to ask the question, and this is what we're pressing. So the National Guards women and men that have been federalized and now deployed, they were taken away from another job, another key mission, right? What work is not getting done in the state of California? I can give you one example. National Guard works with firefighters and fire agencies up and down the state of California to prep now for wildfire risk during the dry, hot summers. So that work is not getting done, leaving California more vulnerable later in the year. What about the Marines? What about the Marines? They're not trained for this. They're trained to go to war abroad, not serve domestically.
Right.
And so what other key missions are not being fulfilled or are now under-resourced because of Trump's fixation with the spectacle that he creates, the chaos he creates to soothe his ego. So our national security is now at further risk because of Donald Trump's obsession.
Don't you find that ironic that we've got Republicans for generations? When I was a Republican, I remember we used to make the argument all the time. The state should have the power to control their economic destiny, their National Guards, all these things. The 10th Amendment argument was made by Republicans all the time. It strikes me as ironic that California is actually that you and Governor Newsom and the government of California have made a more powerful 10th Amendment argument about the rights of the state than the conservatives will.
Yeah. States' rights. I guess for them, unless it's politically inconvenient, that can't be the case. And let's talk also not just about states' rights, but state economies, if you will.
Sure.
I'm a big data guy. My background's in engineering.
Yep.
The state of California, the most populous state in the nation, most diverse state in the nation, home to more immigrants than any state in the nation, mostly documented, yes, some undocumented. This is the same California that is the largest economy of any state in the nation, fourth largest economy in the world. That does not happen despite the immigrant community. It happens because of the contributions of so many immigrants as workforce for sure, but also as consumers and as entrepreneurs. So again, let's target the violent criminals, but for those who are possibly undocumented but otherwise law-abiding, tax-paying, family-raising contributors to our community, there's got to be a better way. But you're not hearing any solutions along those lines from this administration.
So as you go forward into the next next few months of this, and Stephen Miller clearly is the person in control of this process. When Trump started to hear from folks who were saying, "You're hurting farm workers, you're hurting construction, these businesses, these industries that have a lot of people that supported Trump in them. You're hurting our industries." He pulled back for a minute, and then Miller reversed it almost immediately. Are you guys looking at how you can bring Stephen Miller some accountability on Stephen Miller's role in all this in the Senate? Because I think he's not a guy with a ton of friends, even on the Republican side.
Yeah. Well, if Republicans would be willing to, right? Because the Republicans are in the majority, so it's coming upon them to determine what hearings we're having and that sort of thing. Some people have asked who's really in charge, and I think that's a real question here. But if I can tell you this, we're going to let up, and we're not going to let up, or we're not going to let up. We're going to double down only in blue cities. It just tells you it's chaotic, it's indecisive. They don't know what they're doing other than saying the quiet part out loud. It's nothing but a raw partisan political attack.
One of the things that has been a real shaping mechanism in all this is that on Fox and a lot of the platforms that Republicans are getting their news from, they've heard for years, they're all criminals. They're all out. They're all taking your job away. And yet in these agricultural and construction jobs, which are jobs in the hot sun, stoop labor, heavy lifting stuff, what we're seeing is not that these immigrants, and documented and undocumented, are they're not showing up at the work site because they're all afraid, legal or not, they're going to get deported. But interestingly enough, it's not being flooded with MAGA occupants or applicants. People aren't running out to take these jobs. This is one of these things that America, and I think California in the lead of it in a lot of ways, as you said, we've always had this accommodation with immigrants, legal and otherwise. Do you think that, as I would like cast your mind ahead to the future a little bit, is there an argument in your mind that we have to once again revisit how we do a work program, how we do, how we accommodate these things that are real in the economy, but that have become such a demonized figure in the minds of a lot of Republican voters?
Yeah, look, that conversation has been happening for years in Congress, more quietly, behind closed doors, trying to craft product to modernize, whether it's, which type of visa programs or work programs you're talking about. But there's been no oxygen for it because of the presence of Trump. And again, that's separate and apart from the folks who have been here, right? On average, decades, not just a few years, but decades. They deserve better than to live in fear of deportation, which is more real now than ever. They have a pathway to not just some legal status, maybe eventually a citizenship. That's not automatic, but it's in our nation's economic interest, in addition to being the morally right thing to do.
I think, you and I approach this from both coasts. Here in Florida, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of Venezuelan and Cuban refugees and other Central American refugees who are about to be sent back to places they fled for fear of prosecution or persecution. And in California, we're seeing, a similar sweep. We're talking about dislocating millions of people to countries that we claim are too dangerous for us to have American tourists travel to, or too economically unstable to do business with. It just strikes me as a really bitter kind of irony that this country is taking these people who are working so hard and contributing so much and slapping them in the face.
And the cruelty of that, not just because of that global context, but the Venezuelan community is a perfect example. They came the proper way through
TPS
status. So they came lawfully. Donald Trump doesn't like it. From one day to the next, he removes those protections, now making them vulnerable, and they're now being targeted after having followed the rules.
Right. That's the great irony. Well, Senator, I know you have to go. I know you have a full-time job. So it was so great to have you on the show today. Thank you so much. Come back anytime, and let's be in touch.
Thank you, Rick. We'd love to. You stay safe.
Thank you so much.